In this assignment, we're going to do the same thing that we did in class, except this time we're going to look at the compact rental car instead of the full-size rental car. So a couple of things that we're going to do first here. We're going to make a list. First, we're going to list what is the cost for the compact rental for a 3-day weekend for up to 300 miles. So on page 3 of our handout for the rental car versus the owned car analysis, it says that the total cost of a compact car rental is $34.47. And that's a fixed cost. And we talked about in class the additional cost per mile since you're paying for your own car back home. So your car doesn't suddenly become free just because you're renting a car. So in addition to renting a car, you're also paying for your car back home. And we said that would be 39 cents per mile. Okay, so we're going to make a little note of those things. So we want to make a formula. We're going to use the formula basically that we just came up with, the fixed cost, and then remember this will be a variable cost because it's per mile. And we're going to we're going to click on this first cell. Right here we're asked to find the total cost for a compact car rental. And we're using the formulas in these blue cells to calculate the total cost. So we're going to hit equals. We're going to hit the 34.47, that's the fixed cost for the rental, plus the variable cost. We're going to put in 0.39 times the number of miles here. So we're going to hit times, let's hit times, and then let's hit the cell reference. There we go. Alright, so if we drive no miles, that makes sense that the rental cost would be $34.47. Alright, we're going to do the same thing. Basically, we're just going to pull down this formula all the way down. And there we get the cost for 50 miles, for driving 100 miles. We can click on these and click in the little cell to see what cell references we're talking about. Alright. Now we want to calculate the average cost per mile. So we're going to hit equals, and we're going to take the total cost, and we're going to divide by the number of miles driven. So we're going to say total cost divided by the number of miles driven, so divided by 82. Now this says divided by 0 because we're not allowed to divide by 0. And then we're just going to pull that cell formula down, all the way down. So now we have our cost per mile. So it's $1.07. That's the average cost per mile if we drive 50 miles. And notice that the more we drive, the cheaper it gets on average. The second part here asks us to use trial and error to input different values into cell H8. Notice that that's yellow just along with that box. So this cell right here, it's asking us to start to look for values where the total costs are nearly equivalent. So we want to look for when the rental cost would be the same as driving our own car. So we want to make that decision as what's the break-even point. So my suggestion is to look at the average cost per mile and start thinking about when does the average cost per mile start to look the same. So I would say they start to get near the same right around here. We have 100 and 150 miles, so in between those two. We see here that the average cost on the left is higher and this is lower. And then all of a sudden the average cost goes lower and then this is higher. Somewhere in here we have that break-even point. So let's start to look for that. Let's type in 125 and see what we get. Okay, so we're going to click in this cell and we're going to type in, we said 125. And let's see what the cost would be. So notice that the average cost is still higher for driving that compact rental. So let's change this a little bit. 130. I'm going to change the yellow cell. There we go. Okay. We said now, remember, we want this to go lower. We want this to get to 63, and the more miles we drive, the lower the average goes. So we want this to go a little bit lower. So let's do 140. Okay, so we're getting close. Let's do 145. Now we went a little too low. So let's do 142. Pretty close. 143, starting to kind of nail that down using that trial and error. And I'd say that's pretty close. So I'd say about 143 miles is pretty close to that break-even point. So I'd say 142, let's see something, 142 was a little too high. 143, just about right. Let's try 144 just to test it out. Just too low, but pretty close. So I'd say somewhere between 143 and 144. We're a little bit above with 143 and a little bit below with 144. So in between 143 and 144, about that number of miles. And that would be our break-even point. So we see that the total cost is about $90 either way. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing here for, now we want to look at what if we have unlimited miles. So we're going to enter in a formula. But before we do that, let's look at that handout that we had, and let's look at what it costs for unlimited miles. Okay, so this information is on page 1, 2, 3. This is on page 4 of that handout for the rental car. And it says that the total cost of a rental for unlimited miles for the compact car is $69.47. And the additional cost per mile, since you're still paying for your car back home, it doesn't suddenly become free. The handout says that's 39 cents per mile still. So that has not changed. Leaving our car in a garage is going to cost the same regardless of what we rent and how long we rent. So 39 cents per mile. So let's compute the total rental cost. So that would be equal to the fixed cost, which is $69.47, plus the variable cost, so that would be 0.39 times the number of miles we drive. So that's 39 cents per mile. So 39 cents times the number of miles. Okay, we're just going to pull that on down. All right, now we want to look at the average cost per mile. So it's going to be equal to total cost divided by the number of miles driven. Okay, we can't divide by 0, so it's going to give us kind of an undefined value there. We're going to pull that formula down, and then we'll start to look at our comparison. Remember that we're comparing the average cost per mile for both rentals. So it looks like we're pretty close together, around 300 miles. And notice again, as we look at the cost per mile for the rental, the more miles that are driven, the lower the cost goes. So the higher the mileage, the lower the average cost goes. So it looks like we're really pretty close to around 300. We want this, though, to be a little bit higher so we get close to that 63 cents. We want these prices to get a little bit closer together. So if we want this to go a little bit higher, we're going to choose a value that's a little bit lower than 300. Remember, the higher the mileage, the lower the price, so we want the price to go a little bit higher in that direction. So let's try 280. Now we're using that trial and error to see if when the costs are the same. So at 280, we're pretty close. We want this price to be a little bit lower, so let's go a little bit higher. Let's go to 285. Okay, want to go a little bit lower. Let's go to 290. Pretty close there. So this is a little bit lower than what we want, so it's 290. So let's make this go a little bit lower. So let's go 289. See what that is, and that's pretty close there. So I would say anything between 290, because 290 was a little bit higher than the average cost, right? Or a little bit lower, yeah, a little bit lower, and then 289 was a little bit higher. So I'd say anywhere in between 288 and 289. So about that, and the cost, you notice, for both the rental and for driving your own car are really, really close to being the same.